distinguished guests. As we run out of time, this session will be, as a matter of fact, on the same stream as the first one, and I can see a rather balanced panel with distinguished panelists and friends, two very active ladies, energy leaders, female leaders in the energy sector, especially in the oil and gas sector, and one rather green specialist as a keynote speaker, and of course, a strategy analyst, Mr. John Vougliouklas. Let me present our experts. Our keynote speaker is Mr. George Kremlis, who has been principal advisor to the Greek Prime Minister on energy, climate, environment, and circular economy. Mrs. Yana Gouta, Group Director, Energy Policy and International Affairs at the Hellenic Petroleum Group of Companies and Chairwoman of ENS Downstream Committee. And Mrs. Katerina Sardi, Greece's Country Manager at Energean. And of course, Mr. John Vougliouklas, Director, Energy Director, Strategy Director at PwC. Is Mr. Kremlis with us? Good afternoon, Mr. Kremlis.
Good afternoon, Professor Farandouris.
Thank you for joining us.
You can hear me well.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As a green specialist and as an EU man for many years, for decades in Brussels, I would like to start with you and ask you directly if you believe that the European Union could have done differently. Was the energy crisis foreseeable, or the war has exacerbated? And do you think that the energy crisis and the war delaying the energy transition towards carbon neutrality? What is the situation, what the current situation, what are the perspectives for energy transition, and where we stand?
Too many questions at the same time. Thank you very much, Professor Farandouris. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Unfortunately, as the previous panel, a very interesting one, has lasted much longer than expected, after my presentation, I will have to leave you as I need to chair another panel. There are now too many panels on energy issues happening at the same time. So I'm really sorry to have to leave you after my presentation. Let me start by saying that the war in Ukraine has massively disrupted the global and European energy markets and exacerbated the energy crisis in some kind of snowball effect. A first remark as a lesson to draw from the war and the energy crisis, for which we were not in the European Union sufficiently prepared, is that as the conference on the future of Europe has now ended, we clearly need a new energy union in the new treaty, which in my opinion is a must. And we are happy to hear other voices such as the strong one of President Macron claiming that we need a new treaty. As you very well know, in the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, there is only one article on energy. While we need a new energy architecture, we need a new ambitious energy union to be able to tackle all the energy problems that we have been facing and the upcoming energy problems. Now, let me say and mention some points which are very relevant as regards the questions that you have asked. First of all, there are shortcomings in the EU on gas storage, which have been felt and which have somehow exacerbated the prices, which in reality are gas prices. So the problem is due to the gas prices, which have led to an increase of the electricity prices, as we all know. And as you know, the new rules, EU rules on gas storage, are the rules which require member states without storage facilities, and Greece is one of them, to ensure that gas is stored in other EU countries by the 1st of November this year, corresponding to at least 15% of the annual gas consumption of the member state concerned. So this is a new obligation. And of course, for Greece, we are looking into our neighbors, Bulgaria and Greece, to be able to meet this obligation that we have. Let me say that the response of the EU, which has not been well prepared to face this energy crisis, is the Repower EU plan, a very ambitious plan, which is a plan aiming at phasing out from Russian fossil fuels by 2027. Saving energy is one of the pillars. Producing clean energy is the other pillar. And diversifying the energy supplies is the third pillar. And of course, Repower EU is accompanied by a financial and legal framework to build the new energy infrastructure and the system that Europe needs, which is to develop renewables, to develop hydrogen. And in that respect, I would like to say, listening to a previous speaker, it is not the European Commission alone that legislates or takes decisions which go beyond what they should have thought about. It is the Council and the European Parliament, the co-legislators. And in that respect, it is important to say that the European Commission has adopted the Delegated Act to the taxonomy regulation to ensure that gas, because of the energy crisis, will be considered, although it was considered as a transition fuel, will be considered as a sustainable fuel, benefiting up to 2035 for new gas plants according to new standards, low emission standards, as well as giving this status to nuclear power plants, in particular SMR, small modular reactors, which could be developed in that respect. Now, what is extremely important in this Repower EU is to build this new architecture, which will enable us to phase out from Russian gas, as the European Union relies strongly on Russian gas. And of course, two worrying news which will exacerbate the situation is that on the one hand, an export platform in the United States, because of a problem, will suspend the supply of gas from the United States to Europe. And the other bad news is that Gazprom has announced that they will reduce the quantities of gas that will be provided through Nord Stream 1 to Germany. Now, I would like to conclude this short presentation, as unfortunately I'm under time constraints, by making a reference to Acer's final assessment of the EU wholesale electricity market design. It is a very recent assessment of April 2022, which was produced upon request of the European Commission. One key finding of this assessment is that, according to Acer, the current energy crisis is in essence a gas price shock, which also impacts electricity prices, something that we all know and we all share. The second finding is that the current electricity market design, the one existing, is not to blame for the current crisis. On the contrary, Acer feels that the market rules in place have to some extent helped mitigate the current crisis. And then another finding, while increased energy independence vis-a-vis third countries, and here they refer to Russia, is a policy objective as decided during the European Council in Versailles and enshrined in the Repair Review. Realizing this may well depend on enhanced energy interdependence among EU member states in the interconnection of our networks, and this can be a key objective of a new energy union, as well as the pooling capacity and what was agreed in Versailles that the EU would purchase something which, of course, is not mandatory for all its member states, will purchase gas with the view to enabling a fair sharing, as we have done with vaccinations against the COVID pandemic. And then what is interesting, and I would encourage you to read this report assessment, is that it identifies several areas to future-proof the current electricity market design. So these are thoughts that I wanted to share with you all. Thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if Professor Farandouri, you would like to add something more. If not, I will be obliged to leave you, wishing you a successful continuation of this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Kremlis. Thank you for these interesting remarks. I will take the opportunity and the privilege of moderating this panel to come back to you with a short question. You mentioned the European Commission and the decision makers in the EU, which has been for decades the Council and the European Parliament. However, the European Commission has been the locomotive of this European integration process. And very recently, the President of the European Commission admitted that this internal energy market does not function properly. So my question to you, if you have an idea, to what extent and to which direction forward do you believe the European Commission will take steps to fix out this non-properly functioning internal energy market?
As you have pointed out, the European Commission is taking initiative. It is proposing, but the legislators are the Council, the Energy Council, the Environment Council, as the case may be, and the European Parliament, the two legislators. And recently, we are also under a very strong political, I would say, role of the European Council, heads of state and government, which, although it is not a legislative body of the European Union, takes sui generis decisions that are subsequently enshrined, endorsed by the Commission in its proposals and by the other institutions. I do believe that the European Commission, following the various European Councils discussions, and we know that Greece has been extremely active in that respect, has proposed the REPowerEU framework, a very ambitious and important framework to boost energy transition, energy efficiency. And of course, here, as you have mentioned at the very beginning, the challenge is not to undermine the energy transition and carbon neutrality process because of the energy crisis. I mean, you are aware that Germany will start operating again its coal plants because they need to face the likely reduction of gas from Gazprom. So again, this is probably a step backwards, but what is extremely important is to ensure that the management of the energy crisis, and Repower EU aims at that, to ensure some kind of win-win solution, phasing out from Russian gas, reducing our dependency by 2027 from Russian gas, while boosting the energy transition through energy efficiency, through renewables. And in that respect, I must say that I agree with Professor Kapros. I was following the last part of the previous panel in the role that renewables can play. And I would like to add that hydrogen has also an extremely important role to play. And let me say that our project, GREGI, to connect through a cable Egypt to Attica, to bring green electricity from Egypt, which will be produced there through renewable energy projects, is an extremely important one under Repower EU. It will be also considered as a PCI, and it will improve the energy mix of the European Union while bringing green energy to Greece, to Bulgaria, and to the other countries of the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Kremlis. Thank you for your time. Looking forward to the European institutions' initiatives. We wish you all best. And now we move to the industry, the oil and gas industry, and Mrs. Gouta, representing a powerful and most dynamic company in Greece, ELPE refinery. What is the situation? What is the current situation regarding prices, perspectives of the refineries industries, with particular focus on Greece, if I may?
Dear Mr. Ferrandouris, dear Nicholas, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And let me first say a thank you to the organizers, to IENE and Mr. Stambolis for this invitation. It is my honor and pleasure to participate in this event and in this panel. From what we heard from previous speakers, I think we will all agree that during the last 2 years, everything changed in the energy sector. And I will focus, as Nicholas said, on the oil sector. And let me use from now on the term fuels manufacturers sector instead of oil sector, because we believe that this term corresponds better to a future moving away from oil. Let us see what is the business and regulatory environment in which we operate. First of all, of course, we had to face during the last 2 years the two unprecedented and unexpected crises, the COVID crisis and the war against Ukraine. And our sector was one of the most impacted sectors from those two crises. But besides this situation of the two crises, we also have to respond as a sector to a very unstable, uncertain, and ever-changing business and regulatory environment, as I said. First, because of all the institutional changes happening because of the Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package. Also because of the very highly competitive international environment in which we operate, as well as changes in the consumers' needs and consumer choices and the decline of market demand. And also, last but not least, the new investors' requirements and commitments. And with all those changes and uncertainties, we can say for sure that even for our sector, there is no business as usual anymore, and that transformation of our sector is the only answer to all those challenges, and I would say the only way out of this situation. We already discussed about the Ukraine crisis that disrupted the market and the geopolitics of energy, driving oil and gas prices to the very high level of nearly a decade now, and of course impacting a lot the cost of living and the quality of life for European citizens. And during this crisis, Europe realized, first of all, the vulnerability of its energy supplying system and the need to revisit this energy supplying system of Europe. And of course, the importance of the energy assets already in place and the need to find ways to ensure energy autonomy in the future. But talking about energy autonomy, let's be clear, this won't happen overnight, won't happen tomorrow. It will take years for Europe to reach its energy autonomy. According to Eurostat facts for 2019, 60% of our energy needs in Europe, is covered by importing fossil fuels, while renewables account for only 15% of the EU energy consumption, which means that, as I said, Europe has a long way to go towards climate neutrality and towards its energy autonomy. In the meantime, our sector, fuel manufacturer sector, has to continue supplying and providing secure, competitively produced and affordable energy to all business and all European citizens. Mr. Kremblis told us quite a lot of things about REPowerEU plan, which sets a twofold response to the crisis. First, aiming to reduce our energy dependency on Russian oil and refining products, and Russian energy, I would say. I'm speaking on behalf of the oil industry, as I said, but also aiming to fast forward the climate ambition of Europe and the achievement of the climate goals, calling for energy savings, for electrification and renewables. All of those technologies are, of course, very important. We will all agree on that. But we are afraid that renewable and low-carbon liquid fuels will also have to play a very important and crucial role in achieving climate neutrality. But the REPowerEU plan completely ignores those fuels, renewable and low-carbon liquid fuels, although it clearly states within the plan that technology neutrality is of fundamental importance. And it's not only REPowerEU that ignores the importance of renewable and low-carbon liquid fuels, but also the same happens with the Fit for 55 package, a legislative package that has also a huge impact in our sector, and a package which clearly chooses certain technologies while banning some other technologies, again going against the technology neutrality principle. And I think that what should be made clear in this discussion today is that what we need to ban are the fossil fuels, the petroleum origin fuels, and not the technologies themselves, because the technologies that currently today use petroleum origin fuels could today use renewable or low carbon liquid fuels to produce the same result. And these would be very critical for sectors such as aviation, maritime, road transport as well. And of course, it will be very important for the industrial sector, with no need for any new investment cost for all those sectors, even for the road transport sector. And in this way, it could achieve from today a crucial reduction of CO2 emissions and also contribute to a just transition for all European citizens, which is a very critical issue, as other speakers already highlighted. And the question is how our sector, how fuels manufacturers sector, respond to all those challenges I mentioned. I will briefly refer to the vision of LP Group of Company. As our CEO announced recently, according to our Vision 2025, our goal is to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. And we are going to achieve that in two ways. First, by transforming our core business, not only with energy efficiency plan, but also by adopting new technologies such as CCS, blue and green hydrogen, green electricity, and with those targets, we will achieve the 30% reduction of our carbon footprint, while the other 20% of reduction will be offset by investing in renewables, mainly wind and solar. We are also targeting our Scope 3 emissions by developing energy products and services with projects such as charging infrastructure, use of sustainable feedstock in our refineries, recycling of plastic in refining and in our petrochemical processes. And in this pathway, we're not alone. All fuels manufacturers in Europe are investing in a wide range of new big low-carbon projects across Europe, including, as I said, CCUS, e-fuels, green hydrogen, advanced biofuels, biorefinery conversions, waste to fuel, etc. But it is very important to highlight that in order to achieve the development of those technologies at scale, we need the right regulatory framework. We need a supportive regulatory framework and not a regulatory framework that bans technologies. As for the current crisis, our industry is ready to play a leading role in progressively reducing our dependence on Russian oil and oil products. And as a first step, our focus is on ensuring the uninterrupted supply of liquid fuels and refining products for the EU businesses and for the EU citizens. And let's not forget that today, 240 billion cars in Europe, while 27 million aircrafts and 90,000 ships globally rely on liquid fuels that are produced from our refineries, without mentioning the chemical industry's dependence on refining products as well. This is the first goal, and the second very important goal of our sector as a response to the crisis we've been through is the medium to long-term goal. As I already said, the goal for our industry to replace our petroleum origin feedstock, which is mainly imported, by sustainable biomass, recycled CO2, waste, and other raw materials, which are domestic raw materials, in order to produce renewable and low-carbon liquid fuels. The final goal will be, of course, the e-fuels, which are fuels 100% renewables, produced by water and CO2 through with the use of green electricity. And the benefits of this pathway I described are, I believe, obvious. First, the substantial contribution to the European goals for climate change, and of course, a drastic improvement of the energy security of supply by severing the dependency on imported petroleum and oil products. And I will conclude by repeating again that in order to achieve all those plans and in order to be able to respond to those crises and to the challenges of the future, we certainly need an enabling and supporting regulatory framework that will be the key in this transformation and in this energy transition of our economy.
Thank you, Mrs. Guta. I would love to discuss with you regulatory institutional aspects, but since you have focused on the technology issues, I would also like to ask you, do you have an estimate on the investments needs in the coming years for the plan you just described?
Yeah. According to Fuels Europe, which is the association of our sector, representing all companies operating refineries in Europe and not only in Europe, Fuels Europe estimates that an amount of 400 to 650 billion euros will be needed within the next 30 years by 2050. And coming to Greece and to our company, LPEC Group of Companies, according to the announcements by our CEO, Mr. Siamisis, we will have an investment of 3.5 to 4 billion euros within the next 5 to 10 years, half of them driven to low carbon energies and new technologies.
Sure.
So it will be a huge amount at European level and, of course, for every company of the sector.
On the other hand, in what way do you believe this technology neutrality you describe is connected to just transition? Can you give us an example of this transition?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, we cannot discuss about just transition without taking into account affordability for all European citizens. Ensuring and securing the access to sustainable mobility for all European citizens is one of the most important parameters of the energy transition of our economies. And a study that was recently published by a consultant for Fuels Europe shows that most of the European population cannot afford buying not even a new car. And the numbers say that 40 to 60% of the Western European countries, of the citizens of the Western European countries, are only able to buy a new car, while for the Central and Eastern European countries, just 20% of the population is able to afford a new car. So the rest of the population has to drive a second-hand car. And I'm not talking about an electric car, which is much more expensive. I'm talking just for new cars. In whole Europe, the majority of the population finds difficulties to buy an electric car. Let us not forget that the cost of an electric car is subsidized by the governments, and these make electromobility depending on the capability of member states, of the financial capability of the member states and of the GDP of the member states. And within this context, the low carbon liquid fuels and the renewable fuels that I mentioned could offer an alternative solution for all European citizens from today at no cost, without any cost for fleet change or without any cost for new infrastructure. So in this way, if we promote the development of those fuels, we can have a second choice for the consumers. We could enable the 200 million cars that will be on the European roads after 2030 to use those fuels and reduce a lot their CO2 emissions. And in this way, we could secure the just transition. And in a completely different direction, we had last week the adoption by the European Parliament of the banning of the internal combustion engine for road transport, something that was proposed by the Commission, but European Parliament voted for this banning. It is sad to ban technologies instead of securing the technology neutrality and giving many options to the citizens, because it is more than sure that energy transition will cost us a lot, and therefore we should give alternatives and choices to citizens if we want to achieve the just transition.
Yeah, thank you. I would agree with you that affordability has been currently the elephant in this room, and perhaps we can come back to this in our short discussion with our audience now. Thank you very much, Mrs. Guta. Let's move to another active business major operator in Southeastern Europe with Greek origin, Energean, and invite Mrs. Katerina Sardi, who has been the Greece's country manager of Energean, to speak about latest developments in Eastern Mediterranean and in your field. As a matter of fact, there was an agreement signed recently on Cairo, actually on Wednesday, between the EU, Israel, and Egypt. To what extent Energean is relevant to the developments in Southeastern Mediterranean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everybody. I am one of those people that remain attached to PowerPoint. I used to be quite good with computers some time ago. Here I tried to strike a balance, so I am going to use PowerPoint, yes, but I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. Instead, I have a few pictures, just to, make things a little bit, to steer things up, actually, because it's getting a little bit late. So, I would be addressing the energy dilemma as is stated in this section. And essentially, it's useful to remember that there are three pillars in the European energy policy. It's competition, security of supply, and sustainability. These three pillars go together. This is just to catch up from the previous session. And at this moment, we are experiencing a major perturbation in security of supply, and this also affects affordability. So who are we? Energean is an exploration production company. What you see in the picture is the Energean Power. It's a floating production and storage and offtake vehicle. It's not a vehicle, actually. It's an installation. It has recently, a few days ago, been moored to the waters of Israel. It's due to start producing natural gas for the purposes of Israel. It has a capacity of 8 BCMA. This is a little bit more than last year's consumption in Greece. Overall, as the chairman introduced me, we are working in South Mediterranean, investing more than 3 billion actually in South Med, with an 80% portfolio on gas. This does not mean that we are not working on sustainability. We are committed to a net zero profile by 2050. We we have already reduced our carbon intensity by 73%. we have been speaking in this session, in the previous sessions, on what Europe is planning to do. Mr. Kremlis has given a very good introduction to REPowerEU. Professor Kapros talked about REPowerEU. The major issue, we need to secure supplies to replace 160 BCMA of gas in the short term. Yes, demand will be reduced in gas. Gas demand will be substantially reduced in the coming years, but still we would need to replace a big part of this 160. We need to further increase the use of renewables. We need to resort to energy efficiency. There are a lot of things to be done. It's good that the chairman brought up a very important agreement that was reached yesterday between the European Commission and the governments of Egypt and Israel about the export of natural gas to Egypt to be liquefied and then shipped to markets, including the European market. We would like to believe that we would play a role there as Energean, as we are currently carrying out the biggest drilling campaign in East Mediterranean with 5 planned wells, exploration also in Greece and the Adriatic, plus an energy hub in Cyprus. In parallel, we should not forget, sustainability walks along any work on hydrocarbons, any work on security of supply. What you see on the left-hand side is a map of Greece with the red circles showing industrial installations. They're CO2 emitters. They're emitters that are facing currently high prices of CO2 in the European market, prices that are of the order of 85 euros per ton. And they still need to compete with their products, need to compete with products that are imported to EU. And we have also, some of us have read in the last days that together with the fact that natural gas was not introduced into the taxonomy regulation, also the parliament did not agree with the CBAM proposal for a carbon tax at the borders of the EU. So the industry would still need to compete with non-EU but taking into account high CO2 prices. So we're working on the development of CO2 storage. This is what you see in the magnifying glass. A subsea storage of CO2. In parallel, we're also working on hydrogen. Why? Because yes, eventually natural gas will be replaced. We start, however, with natural gas as our feedstock for hydrogen. We're using the CO2 storage, but I don't know what you can see in the picture. We're looking into using waste, non-recyclable waste, as a feedstock for the production of hydrogen. And we stop because there are some problems that need to be addressed like now. And here we come to the dilemmas, because we, meaning the European Union, needs to fill up storages at 80% by November. Greece has no storages, so our target is at 15%. We are looking at nearby markets, meaning Bulgaria, meaning Italy. Would we be able to transport this gas? Big question mark. I heard in Professor Kapros' presentation, he mentioned that infrastructure would be needed, new infrastructure for a limited period of time. This is challenging. It's challenging for investment, particularly when gas is something that it becomes profitable, and investments in gas become profitable maybe after 20 years. So there are a lot of issues to be addressed. NGO in its summer outlook has mentioned that there's limited pipeline transportation capacity if we want to reverse the flows from Russia to Europe. But in the meantime, it is true that Europe has been investing for the last 20 years for flows from the south to the north. So yes, potentially East Mediterranean could offer some solutions. Yes, in the future, hydrogen could be the replacement of gas. But at the moment, hydrogen is very expensive. It's maybe 3 times more expensive than gas. And at this stage, there are no real support mechanisms for the support of hydrogen, as has been the case with renewables 20 years ago. And clearly, infrastructure for CO2 storage is limited. Then also there are very little or maybe zero support mechanisms for capturing. I don't know. The response dilemmas remain. The response is that the securing gas from East Mediterranean could be a choice, together with hydrogen, together with renewables, together with developing hydrocarbon fields. The thing is, it's not one policy. It's many policies that need to work together. That's from me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your thorough introduction regarding Energean's activities in the region. I would love to focus a little bit more on Prinos' role as a storage facility for CO2 emissions. If you can, with a few words, tell us next steps forward to make Prinos a real storage facility for CO2. Let's move to our next speaker as we run out of time.
Okay, very fast. It's something that needs to happen very quickly because this is also running out of time. Q4 2025, it needs to be operational. It's a commitment we have with the Recovery Fund. It will start as a smaller facility with about 1 million tons of CO2 to be expanded very shortly, depending on the demand, probably mid-2026. We're in discussions with the Greek industry. I think it would become a very important, state-of-the-art project.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, the floor is with John Vougliouklas is with us. Mr. Vougliouklas, director at PwC. And I would like to invite you, Mr. Vougliouklas, during our short period of time that has been left, to give us an overview of renewables future within Repower, their role in the short and medium term in Greece, and the new framework conditions for renewable investments in Greece.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening to everybody. Good evening to friends. And also many thanks to ENE and personally to Kostis Stambolis for inviting me to this conference, to this event, to share my view. I will try to be quite, let's say, to the point, because also the time has passed. But starting, I wanted to emphasize the fact that even in the context of REPowerEU, which is, let's say, the main element from the side of the Commission to address now the current energy crisis that all of us are facing, renewables are not an outlier. Is the main element, is the core element. Renewables are there within the Repower clearly in order not to defocus from the goals in the medium and the long term, which is the goals under the Fit for 55, with the even higher, let's say, share of renewables, and of course increased ambitions in energy efficiency in our energy mix, and also to address the challenges for new energy carriers, like the ones that have been already mentioned, like hydrogen, biomethane, and other kind of uses. And of course, all of this to be in a balance with, let's say, the proper, let's say, use and better exploitation of all other different fuels for the next period. So here there is a sum up of the objectives under the Repower. So definitely there is an issue of security in order to diversify supplying sources for oil and gas. But then we have to further boost energy efficiency to decarbonize different, let's say, end-use sectors. Of course, gradually in some sectors that they are very hard to abandon, like the industry sector. Also to further, let's say, accelerate the RES penetration and RES growth in the different energy markets, not only the electricity market, and to improve the cross-border cooperation in terms of energy infrastructures, both for new green fuels. If we want to see it in a greater perspective, let's say in the context of a comprehensive EU governance framework, here I just try to map up some of the key elements, where the core, of course, is the Green Deal. So we have the targets for 2030 and also the long-term targets up to 2050, which is the ultimate goal for a carbon neutral economy. We have different instruments that are continuously being enhanced, like the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the REPower. We have issues like that are arising from new state aid guidelines and the taxonomy, as has been addressed and highlighted before, and new funds that are being mobilized, like the Innovation and Modernization Fund, to assist and accelerate the transition, let's say, to this new green environment. Here, just to highlight that even now in the context of this current energy crisis, there is a growing discussion already to increase the ambition for the renewable and energy efficiency targets for 2030, targets that have been already increased once time 2 years ago. So let's let's move to the core, let's say, of my today's intervention, which is a bit to highlight some key challenges for renewables in the Greek market. So what we are, let's say, experiencing now, maybe also to highlight a link with the previous session. Already, we have seen on a daily basis penetration of renewables more than 65%, already 68%. Of course, this has been on a daily basis, not on a yearly basis. But just have in mind that in 2030, let's say, the share of renewables in the domestic power generation is expected to be more than 70%. We have, let's say, a market, a quite dynamic market with, let's say, a very high investment interest that is growing to a range of close to 1 gigawatt per year. And this growth rate is expected to remain stable at least until 2025. We have already launched the revision, the process for the revision of our National Energy and Climate Plan, which is expected to adopt a higher ambition, both for renewable energy efficiency, most likely to lead to targets for PV and wind more than 20 gigawatt until the end of 2030, from around 9 that we are standing right now. And in the same context, now we have too many new elements and many framework conditions that we have, let's say, to consider and I would say to digest in terms of both regulatory planning, but also assessing the investment interest. So we have, let's say, in the next period, a new framework for offshore wind parks that is going to be put, let's say, in public consultation, but definitely also to be ratified in a very short time. We have a new scheme for RES auctions until 2025 and a similar scheme for RES hybrid auctions in the non-interconnected islands. We are one of the first countries in Europe that we are going to establish a support scheme for electricity storage facilities and also a relevant operational and regulatory framework. We are in the process now to ratify the second phase for the fast-track licensing procedure for new renewable plants, and also to establish some new grid connection rules and procedures that are aiming gradually to uplift the main issue and the main bottleneck for the further renewable penetration in electricity, which is the grid congestion. So if we try now to summarize all this in 3 different, let's say, aims and strategies for the next period. From one hand, we have to map the opportunities that exist in the renewable market. So we have new participants and new services that can be offered from renewables. either in the form of an aggregated, let's say, participation, or a combined participation with or without storage facilities. Still, the levelized cost of electricity from key renewable technologies like photovoltaic and wind is significantly lower than not just the current, of course, wholesale price, but also the whole price that we have experienced, let's say, the previous years. So this is formulated, let's say, significant competitive, let's say, advantage from these technologies to have different roles and to be enablers of a new market mechanism, like bilateral contracts, the well-known PPAs. We have new energy carriers like hydrogen, like biomethane, like synthetic renewable fuels that are gradually considered in all kinds of different, let's say, uses, and are going to facilitate the well-known and highly anticipated sector coupling, which is the ultimate goal to achieve and to have a renewable share in the whole energy consumption of more than 40% in the next period. Challenges, not just a few, a lot of them. Like the ones that Katerina Misisardi said about carbon capture, similar challenges also still exist for renewables. Challenges in terms of grid connection, regulatory issues, because not to forget that our electricity market is still under development, is a relative new market. Let's say also the intervention that we have seen last week from the side of the European Commission about the structure of the electricity market. I have to say it was well anticipated. It's normal. We are dealing with electricity markets that have been formulated some decades ago in the context, let's say, of negligible participation from variable renewables, where now the variable renewables are becoming, let's say, the protagonist, the main, let's say, participant in this market. So definitely we have to face some new structural changes. And a big challenge is that we face the risk sometimes, especially here in Greece, our market to become overheated. Overheated because there is a significant domestic potential for new renewable assets, for new renewable investments, but nevertheless, the grid and the market space is limited. So there we have to, let's say, develop the appropriate support schemes, the appropriate market mechanisms to try, let's say, to rationalize and to identify the appropriate, let's say, level and size of these new renewable assets and relevant share in the electricity mix. In terms of strategy, when we speak about new investments, about new opportunities, the big issue is that we have to follow a deep understanding of the regulatory regime and the upcoming changes, to identify the potential risks, to assess any mitigated strategies and how this can be performed. Of course, to understand the dynamics of the market, not just for renewables, but also for all the different fuels, for all the different participants, and the growing, let's say, framework, both at European level, but also at regional level, to understand opportunities for cross-border cooperation and participation in neighboring markets. And of course, when we're speaking on a project base, then we have to understand specific timelines, to understand every time what will be, let's say, the level of market maturity at the time of entering in a specific market segment, and also to understand the needs both at production and consumption side. I try to, let's say, to summarize quite fast, I hope, my intervention in order to save some time, if it's possible, also for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vouglioklakis. Thank you for this presentation, summarizing opportunities, challenges, and strategy. Now, as we run out of time, I would summarize. I believe that all panelists would agree that the common denominator of your presentation is the transitional status of all aspects of the energy sector, from investment to regulatory regime, from institutions to prices. Unless there is a question from the audience, yes, a very short question. Let's move on because we have run out of time. Your name and capacity, please, and a short question with short answers, please. Yes, please.
My question is, Ms. Sardi, you mentioned...
Would you tell us your name? And
my name is Gökhan Yardım. You mentioned about yesterday's agreement about the LNG delivery. Is it a detailed agreement or is it a general framework? Because Egypt is already and Israel is already delivering LNG to Europe and to many places.
Thank you.
The only thing I know is whatever was available in the press.
Yes. That has been a very recent agreement. More details to come.
It was a governmental agreement.
Yes. And a final question from Dr. Elinas, please. Be so kind to be very short because we're running out of time.
Just a clarification.
Sure.
I read the agreement.
Okay.
It's not an agreement. It's an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, merely setting some principles. And it's only valid for 9 years. Beyond that, it doesn't go.
Yes. Right. Thank you very much. I think we are ready for our short break. Bear with us. Thank you all for being so patient and kind with time limits. And let's get back very soon.